Hi, everyone. Before we get to today's episode of Jungian Ever After, I wanted to let you know that George Bright will be coming back to the United States, to the Jung Institute, to speak for us later this month on clinical practice in light of the Red Book. Also, our week-long summer intensive will be June 22nd through 26th, and registration is now open on our website. Also, our annual fundraising drive is currently on, so if you want to support this podcast and everything else we do at the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago, just visit our website, youngchicago.org. Thanks.
Hello, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 7 of Jungian Ever After, a podcast about myths and fairy tales through the lens of Jungian analysis. I am your host, Reza, and joining me, as always, is my co-host and Jungian analyst, Dr. Adina Davidson. Adina, what can you tell us about the myth that we're discussing today?
So it's this myth, and actually the next few, are all going to have to do with parenting. We're going to look at myths that illustrate the ways that the act of parenting and the choices parents make either support the parent's individuation. As psychologists, we spend 75% at least of our time looking at how parents' choices affected the child, the adult child. But you and I, Reza, we're going to look at how the parents' choices affect the parent and how they either support individuation or they get in its way. I really want to add and make clear that Race and I, we're looking at myth, and therefore we're looking at archetypes and not purely individual human stories. So when we're talking about parenting, we're talking about all of the forms that parenting can take. We can parent our external children.
Mm-hmm.
We can also parent the child inside of us. So we can be looking at this archetypal pattern of how the parent in us parents the child. We can parent vulnerable human beings, teachers, counselors, or just somebody who takes care of our friends.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all going to access the parent archetype. So when we care for people and they are not our literal children, we're still going to be following these archetypal patterns that we're going to look at over the next 3-4 months. The archetypal patterns remain the same.
I will say that my personal lens at this moment is probably going to be a little more focused on the literal parent-child relationship just because I have a 2-year-old and this is sort of new for me.
I mean, of course, I think that it's going to be really obvious and easy to see the ways that these patterns apply to literal external parenting.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for our listeners who don't have that experience or it's far in the past, and actually for everybody, we were all parented by somebody. And so we can see how their parenting affected them. And I think that's an interesting question. And the choices they made when we were the child. And we all do have an internal parent archetype and an internal child archetype. And the way those two archetypal patterns interact with each other and the ways that our ego consciousness makes choices about how they interact very much affects our individuation. And if we are parenting, especially of young children, it affects how we parent our young child.
Yeah. And at the same time, I'm listening to this book, Good Inside, by Dr. Becky, who's, I don't know if psychoanalyst exactly. I'm not, forget exactly what her job title is, but
right.
You know, she gives parenting advice. But one of the things she says is that I've learned more from my kids than I'll ever teach them. And I think that's
true for
quite
all.
True.
Yes, absolutely. And I think being able to listen for that is a very positive sign for being able to do the kind of parenting that furthers individuation, which is the opposite pattern of what we're going to look at today, unfortunately.
Indeed. So we are going to kick this off with reading the start of the Trojan War from Edith Hamilton, and then there's a piece that is after the war when Agamemnon has come home. So there's not a precise, this is the story of Agamemnon and Iphigenia, but you can kind of assemble it from there. The fairest woman in the world was Helen, the daughter of Zeus and Leda, and the sister of Castor and Pollux. Such was the report of her beauty that not a young prince in Greece but wanted to marry her. When her suitors assembled in her home to make a formal proposal for her hand, they were so many and from such powerful families that her reputed father, King Tyndareus, her mother's husband, was afraid to select one among them, fearing that the others would unite against him. He therefore exacted first a solemn oath from all that they would champion the cause of Helen's husband, whoever he might be, if any wrong was done to him through his marriage. It was, after all, to each man's advantage to take the oath, since each was hoping he would be the person chosen. So they all bound themselves to punish to the uttermost anyone who carried or tried to carry Helen away. Then Tyndareus chose Menelaus, the brother of Agamemnon, and made him king of Sparta as well. So matters stood when Paris gave the golden apple to Aphrodite. The goddess of love and beauty knew very well where the most beautiful woman on earth was to be found. She led the young shepherd, with never a thought of Oenone left forlorn, straight to Sparta, where Menelaus and Helen received him graciously as their guest. The ties between guest and host were strong. Each was bound to help and never harm the other. But Paris broke that sacred bond. Menelaus, trusting completely to it, left Paris in his home and went off to Crete. Then Paris, who coming, entered a friend's kind dwelling, shamed the hand there that gave him food, stealing away a woman. Menelaus got back to find Helen gone, and he called upon all Greece to help him. The chieftains responded, as they were bound to do. They came eager for the great enterprise, to cross the sea and lay mighty Troy in ashes. 2, however, of the first rank were missing: Odysseus, king of the island of Ithaca, and Achilles, the son of Peleus and the sea-nymph Thetis. Odysseus, who was one of the shrewdest and most sensible men in Greece, did not want to leave his house and family to embark on a romantic adventure overseas for the sake of a faithless woman. He pretended, therefore, that he had gone mad, and when a messenger from the Greek army arrived, the king was ploughing a field and sowing it with salt instead of seed. But the messenger was shrewd too. He seized Odysseus' little son and put him directly in the way of the plough. Instantly the father turned the plough aside, thus proving that he had all his wits about him. However reluctant, he had to join the army. Achilles was kept back by his mother. The sea-nymph knew that if he went to Troy, he was fated to die there. She sent him to the court of Lycomedes, the king who had treacherously killed Theseus, and made him wear women's clothes and hide among the maidens. Odysseus was dispatched by the chieftains to find him out. Disguised as a peddler, he went to the court where the lad was said to be, with gay ornaments in his pack such as women love, and also some fine weapons. While the girls flocked around the trinkets, Achilles fingered the swords and daggers. Odysseus knew him then, and he had no trouble at all in making him disregard what his mother had said and go to the Greek camp with him. So the great fleet made ready. 1,000 ships carried the Greek host. They met at Aulis, a place of strong winds and dangerous tides, impossible to sail from as long as the north wind blew. And it kept on blowing, day after day. It broke men's hearts, spared not ship nor cable. The time dragged, doubling itself in passing. The army was desperate. At last the soothsayer Calchas declared that the gods had spoken to him. Artemis was angry. One of her beloved wild creatures, a hare, had been slain by the Greeks together with her young, and the only way to calm the wind and ensure a safe voyage to Troy was to appease her by sacrificing to her a royal maiden, Iphigenia, the eldest daughter of the commander-in-chief, Agamemnon. This was terrible to all, but to her father hardly bearable.
"If I must slay the joy of my house, my daughter, a father's hands stained with dark streams flowing from blood of a girl slaughtered before the altar."
Nevertheless, he yielded. His reputation with the army was at stake, and his ambition to conquer Troy and exalt Greece. He dared the deed, slaying his child to help a war. He sent home for her, writing his wife that he had arranged a great marriage for her to Achilles, who had already shown himself the best and greatest of all chieftains. But when she came to her wedding, she was carried to the altar to be killed. And all her prayers, cries of, "Father, Father," her maiden life, these they held as nothing, the savage warriors, battle-mad. She died, and the north wind ceased to blow, and the Greek ships sailed out over a quiet sea. But the evil price they had paid was bound some day to bring evil down upon them. When Troy fell, Agamemnon was the most fortunate of the victorious chieftains. His ship came safely through the storm which wrecked or drove to distant countries so many others. He entered his city not only safe after peril by land and sea, but triumphant, the proud conqueror of Troy. His home was expecting him. Word had been sent that he had landed, and the townspeople joined in a great welcome to him. It seemed that he was of all men the most gloriously successful. After a brilliant victory, back with his own again, peace and prosperity before him. But in the crowd that greeted him with thanksgiving for his return, there were anxious faces, and words of dark foreboding passed from one man to another.
"He will find evil happenings," they muttered.
"Things once were right there in the palace, but no more. That house could tell a tale if it could speak." Before the palace, the elders of the city were gathered to do their king honor, but they too were in distress, with a still heavier anxiety, a darker foreboding than that which weighed upon the doubtful crowd. As they waited, they talked in low tones of the past. They were old, and it was almost more real to them than the present. They recalled the sacrifice of Iphigenia, lovely, innocent young thing, trusting her father utterly, and then confronted with the altar, the cruel knives, and only pitiless faces around her. As the old men spoke, it was like a vivid memory to them, as if they themselves had been there, as if they had heard with her the father she loved telling men to lift her and hold her over the altar to slay her. He had killed her, not willingly, but driven by the army, impatient for good winds to sail to Troy. And yet the matter was not as simple as that. He yielded to the army because the old wickedness in generation after generation of his race was bound to work out in evil for him too. The elders knew the curse that hung over the house.
"The thirst for blood, it is in their flesh. Before the old wound can be healed, there is fresh blood flowing."
10 years had passed since Iphigenia died, but the results of her death reached through to the present. The elders were wise. They had learned that every sin causes fresh sin. Every wrong brings another in its train. A menace from the dead girl hung over her father in this hour of triumph. And yet perhaps, they said to each other, perhaps it would not take actual shape for a time. So they tried to find some bit of hope, but at the bottom of their hearts they knew and dared not say aloud that vengeance was already there in the palace, waiting for Agamemnon. It had waited ever since the queen, Clytemnestra, had come back from Aulis, where she had seen her daughter die. She did not keep faith with her husband who had killed her child and his. She took a lover, and all the people knew it. They knew, too, that she had not sent him away when the news of Agamemnon's return reached her. He was still there with her. What was being planned behind the palace doors? As they wondered and feared, a tumult of noise reached them, chariots rolling, voices shouting. Into the courtyard swept the royal car with the king, and beside him a girl, very beautiful, but very strange-looking. Attendants and townspeople were following them, and as they came to a halt, the doors of the great house swung open, and the queen appeared. The king dismounted, praying aloud.
"O victory, now mine, be mine forever."
His wife advanced to meet him. Her face was radiant, her head high. She knew that every man there except Agamemnon was aware of her infidelity, but she faced them all and told them with smiling lips that even in their presence she must at such a moment speak out the great love she bore her husband and the agonizing grief she had suffered in his absence. Then, in words of exultant joy, she bade him welcome. "You are our safety," she told him, "our sure defense. The sight of you is dear as land after storm to the sailor, as a gushing stream to a thirsty wayfarer." He answered her, but with reserve, as he turned to go into the palace. First he pointed to the girl in the chariot. She was Cassandra, Priam's daughter, he told his wife, the army's gift to him, the flower of all the captive women. Let Clytemnestra see to her and treat her well. With that he entered the house, and the doors closed behind the husband and the wife. They would never open again for both of them. The crowd had gone. Only the old men still waited uneasily before the silent building and the blank doors. The captive princess caught their attention, and they looked curiously at her. They had heard of her strange fame as a prophetess whom no one ever believed, and yet whose prophecies were always proved true by the event. She turned a terrified face to them. Where had she been brought? She asked them wildly. What house is this? They answered soothingly that it was where the son of Atreus lived. She cried out, "No! It is a house God hates, where men are killed and the floor is red with blood." The old men stole frightened glances at each other. Blood. Men killed. That was what they too were thinking of, the dark past with its promise of more darkness. How could she, a stranger and a foreigner, know that past? "I hear children crying," she wailed, "crying for wounds that bleed, a father feasted, and the flesh his children." Thyestes and his sons. Where had she heard of that? More wild words poured from her lips. It seemed as if she had seen what had happened in that house through the years, as if she had stood by while death followed death, each a crime, and all working together to produce more crime. Then from the past she turned to the future. She cried out that on that very day 2 more deaths would be added to the list, one her own. "I will endure to die," she said, as she turned away and moved toward the palace. They tried to hold her back from that ominous house, but she would not have it. She entered, and the doors closed forever on her too. The silence that followed when she had gone was suddenly and terribly broken. A cry rang out, the voice of a man in agony.
"God, I am struck! My death blow!"
And silence again. The old men, terrified, bewildered, huddled together. That was the king's voice. What should they do? Break into the palace? "Quick, be quick," they urged each other. "We must know." But there was no need now of any violence. The doors opened, and on the threshold stood the queen. Dark red stains were on her dress, her hands, her face, yet she herself looked unshaken, strongly sure of herself. She proclaimed for all to hear what had been done. "Here lies my husband dead, struck down justly by my hand," she said. It was his blood that stained her dress and face, and she was glad. "He fell, and as he gasped, his blood spouted and splashed me with dark spray. A dew of death, sweet to me as a heaven's sweet raindrops when the cornland buds." She saw no reason to explain her act or excuse it. She was not a murderer in her own eyes. She was an executioner. She had punished a murderer, the murderer of his own child.
Just a couple of comments about the story, which is, first of all, I don't think Edith Hamilton is generally a particularly poetic teller of the Greek myths, but listening to this read aloud, chills just run down my spine. She really finds the darkness in this story and makes it aloud. This second thing I would say specifically about the myth is that most versions of the myth have Agamemnon taking off his clothes, getting into his bath, dismissing his guards, and then Clytemnestra kills him in the bath. And it's kind of due to his obliviousness that there might be any problem that she's able to kill him like that. And the third thing I want to say is that my husband and I went to Greece in the beginning of September this year. And one of the places that we went on a National Geographic tour, so it was all of this history and archaeology and all of the stuff that is the foundation of this part of our podcast. And one of the places that we went to was the palace of the House of Atreus. And our guide said, we don't know if there was actually an Agamemnon and actually an Iphigenia, but we do know that there was a House of Atreus, and this is where it is. And we got to walk around the archaeological site. We got to see their just beautiful tomb where all of the kings were buried, and then kind of climbed a small mountain to where the palace/fortress was. And they could show us the room and the altar where the House of Atreus did the human sacrifices. Wow. And then there was a small museum with artifacts, and they had the tools that were used, the knives that were used for the human sacrifices. And according to the myth, it was those same knives that Clytemnestra killed Agamemnon with.
Ooh.
Yeah, it was, yeah. You could just feel that in your gut, right?
Very heavy.
Yes. So I'm going to talk back to some of these archetypal patterns of parenting in general. Being a parent changes us. The act of parenting is an archetypal process with profound implications for the parent's development. It goes pretty much without saying that how we parent affects our children's development, but the parent is also changed in the process. And again, I want to remind people that I'm both talking about parenting your actual children, but also parenting the child within and all of the acts of caretaking that we do in our lives.
I mean, I guess I would say they should be changed in the process. If you're not, that's where the problems start. A friend of mine described, and they had twins through IVF, but he described feeling like his brain was being violently pulled apart and reorganized in the wake of his twins' birth. And I think if you're not changed by an experience like that, it doesn't have to be twins, then something is amiss. To your point of not necessarily having to be the parent, literally, I think I sort of started to slowly undergo some of this change when I was taking care of my nephew. My sister needed infant care because the daycare didn't start taking in until 18 months, which I think is pretty common.
Yeah.
And so I bridged that gap from about 7 months to the 18 months. And it was a dramatic shift for me,
Yes. I just have a memory of, as you were describing, this violent pulling apart of our brains. I remember a month after my oldest was born, he'd gone down for however many hours he was going to go down for it, 4 weeks old. And I went to bed and I was struck with this absolute feeling of terror. I remember thinking to myself, kind of naming it, I don't know who I am anymore. I'm not who I was. And I know I'm going to be somebody else, but I'm not that somebody else yet. And feeling like, I don't know if I would have located it in my brain so much, but feeling like my identity was being pulled apart and had not reformed. And I think you're right. If you can't tolerate that experience, then you're not going to be able to do what you need to do as a parent, and that is going to reverberate back onto you. When we think about individuation, Jung talked about there being two main factors in individuation: love and sacrifice. In the Red Book, the following dialogue explains the importance of sacrifice. Serpent, do you mean to live without sacrifice? Life must cost you something, mustn't it? But the spirit of the depths said, sacrifice is not destruction. Sacrifice is the foundation stone of what is to come. So I think that sacrifice of our identity, kind of that solid sense, is part of this foundation of what is to come.
Mm-hmm.
Jung observed that the root of the word sacrifice is to perform sacred rites. When we sacrifice appropriately, we do something sacred. We serve something larger than ourselves. In Jungian terms, we call this larger something the self. When sacrifice serves the self, it is an integral part of the individuation process. All along our lifespan, we need to sacrifice dying, unneeded, or outgrown parts of psyche in order to make room for new growth. And we need to deeply invest in love, to accept it as, to quote Jung, a force of destiny whose power reaches from heaven to hell.
It's interesting for me to talk about sacrifice in terms of sacred rites. I think a lot of ways that we consider sacrifice in regular contexts are either very, very dark in terms of blood sacrifice or these ancient religions that we look down upon.
The House of Atreus,
Right.
altar of human sacrifice and their
Right.
knives.
Or in terms of someone sacrificing themselves to save someone else.
Mm.
Because we look down on the blood sacrifice, we don't necessarily think of it as a sacred thing. I think if a sacrifice is ritualized, our brain immediately goes to bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's more the not ritualized ones that we celebrate.
The fireman who runs into the burning building.
Exactly. And I like thinking of it in terms of something sacred, particularly internally,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sacrificing something within us for the purposes of individuation.
And I think the word individuation is very confusing because it sounds like it's about the individual. But actually, our individuation process serves the collective as well as us personally. There isn't such a distinction between individual growth and consciousness and so when we sacrifice for our own individuation, we are also sacrificing for a collective growth in consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Back to parenting. So good parenting is a process that requires both sacrifice and love and is therefore an extremely powerful agent of individuation or its opposite. To be a good parent requires sacrificing one's day-to-day wants and sometimes our needs, putting someone else first while at the same time holding the child with love. So if you put the child's needs first, but you are resentful of it, that is neither going to serve you or the child. Unfortunately, the archetypal pattern of parenting, like all archetypal patterns, has a dark face. We can make the wrong sacrifice, as our story of Agamemnon and Iphigenia illustrates, and our next myth will as well. And when we make that wrong sacrifice, we both harm the archetypal child and the archetypal adult.
So we've talked about a few instances in season 1, like Hansel and Gretel, but I don't think we've ever had anything this explicit in terms of sacrificing a child for one's own ends. Hansel and Gretel, I think, is the closest, maybe?
Rumpelstiltskin, where the king says, oh,
Sure.
yes, of course my daughter can spin straw into gold.
Yeah, I guess even that.
He doesn't take the knife to his daughter himself.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But when we look at not just Greek myth, but biblical myth, Indian myth, when we look at myth, one of the patterns that repeats over and over again is the struggle of whether to sacrifice one's child or to sacrifice something of oneself. In the myth of Agamemnon and Iphigenia, Agamemnon chooses to sacrifice his child rather than himself. And this failure results in profound consequences.
When I was having second thoughts about having a child, this is before we started IVF, when finally felt like we were income stable to be on that path, I think I was ultimately fearing that change. And perhaps even I wouldn't have thought to frame it this way until you mentioned it, but fearing that I would have some resentment, that I would absolutely love and care for the child and do everything I was supposed to do, but there might be this seed of resentment, if not towards the child, then maybe towards my wife.
Which I think we're going to have some. We don't ever get to only have the bright side of an archetypal pattern. We're stuck with the dark side also. And I can't imagine a parent who doesn't have moments of resentment. But we get to make choices about what we do with those moments of resentment.
Right. And I think I could sense that, even knowing that I would love the child, that I would care for them, that I was scared of prioritizing the child over my partner. The thing was very scary, this person that I love more than anyone else, that I would now be substituting in someone even higher in that ranking. And, I feel good about it now, of course, but also I'm not the same person I was before, as you talked about. And I think it's that being on the precipice of a kind of little death.
Absolutely. And I think when we're contemplating having a child, particularly a first child, we kind of intuitively know, who I've been growing for the past 29 years. I am sacrificing that. That is going to go. And that's terrifying. Should be terrifying. There's something wrong with you if you're not terrified.
Yeah, we're just naive. But I think that now every dark scenario that I plan for involves me or making some kind of sacrifice to protect my daughter, not the other way around, which, as someone deeply terrified of death, is
huge change in psyche, right?
Yeah.
It's a huge. I also think that the problem with Agamemnon was his plan involved sacrificing his child, not himself. So the tale of Agamemnon and Iphigenia tells of an archetypal pattern of failure to grow past his own narcissism in parenting. Agamemnon is unable to develop the capacity to see others, including his own child, as fully human. He only values his own needs and wants. So he's afraid to be embarrassed in front of the army.
Right.
That's more important than the life of his child. So the tragedy of the House of Atreus is both a result of and contributes to Agamemnon's failure in individuation.
Mm-hmm. Feels as though narcissism is at the root of a lot of problems, individuation and otherwise. Although I do think that reading Edith Hamilton's telling, as opposed to just knowing the main beats, there is a little bit more sympathy for Agamemnon than I expected, or maybe not. Sympathy is not the right word, but just in terms of showing the position he feels he's in, right? That he doesn't want to do this, but he's gonna do it for the army, for the war,
which is interesting because our next myth is going to be Medea, a mother who kills her children. She also doesn't want to kill her children, but does it anyway for different reasons. But Agamemnon in this story shows the archetypal pattern of the dark face of the hero as well as the dark face of the parent. He has all of that of the hero's unconscious strength, destructiveness, and narcissism. Those who are overly identified with this negative aspect of the hero archetype are unable to predict or empathize with the human carnage to others and sometimes themselves that results from their actions. I mean, we can think of Hercules, who never intended harm to anyone, but carnage ensued all the time.
Absolutely.
Or we can think of Agamemnon, who consciously intended harm to others, and carnage ensued.
Right. And we discussed a lot of, real world parallels in the Narcissus episode, but I think back a lot to the statement that another person who I don't love, but head of OpenAI, said of Elon Musk that he desperately wants to save the world as long as he's the one saving it. Very much that power hero fantasy.
Yes.
And a great many of the things he did in the name of efficiency could only have been done without respect for the lives of others.
Right. So a hero without empathy is a very dangerous thing.
Yeah, doesn't seem like hero really is applicable.
Again, dark side, bright side, right? Agamemnon was the war chief for, I don't really know how to pronounce this word, Achaeans in the war against Troy, and a prime example of a power hero or a negative hero. This war was fought to recover his brother Menelaus' wife Helen from the Trojan prince, or from Paris. As Agamemnon was getting ready to sail to war, he offended Artemis, and she stopped the winds from blowing. Agamemnon needed Artemis's favor and her wind to be able to bring his men to battle. He willingly, and apparently without guilt or sorrow, sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia in order to placate Artemis. After killing his daughter, he was able to sail to Troy.
I think that at least the reading we did seemed to put a little tension on the without guilt or sorrow part.
Right. She said he did feel sorry. He just didn't feel sorry enough to
to not do it.
To not do it. To say, you know what, folks, we're going to have to wait till spring. Later, when the war was finally won, Agamemnon sailed home, blindly expecting to be welcomed with open arms by his wife Clytemnestra. Foolishly and arrogantly, he seemed to be unaware of any need for caution when he returned to the mother of the murdered Iphigenia.
Which I suppose when you treat people as possessions, then it would be surprising to have one of them turn against you.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I mean, I think of like slaveholders who were shocked when their slaves revolted and felt personally betrayed. Agamemnon was so dominated by his own narcissism that he couldn't see that Clytemnestra might be angry at him for killing her child and that she would want revenge. Clytemnestra was able to take advantage of his unreconstructed narcissism, his inability to see anyone else's perspective, and she was therefore able to kill him as he bathed without his guards or his arms. This is a powerful example of the harm that narcissism does to those around the narcissist, but also to the one who cannot sacrifice their own narcissism. Agamemnon was so self-centered that he literally could not imagine that anyone might be angry at him, not even the mother of a murdered child. He therefore does not protect himself against Clytemnestra's revenge.
And I believe that the cycle continues as well.
And it also has roots in earlier House of Atreus. The cannibalism of children is one of Agamemnon's ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, this is...
Yeah, Agamemnon's son, I think, takes revenge on Clytemnestra, which I guess he didn't like his sister very much.
I mean, as the old man said, blood just begets blood, begets blood.
Yeah. In the Odyssey, Odysseus goes into Hades for a time.
Yeah.
And sees, yes, all these old heroes that he would have heard about, like Hercules, etc., but also sees Agamemnon. And it's like, I thought you made it home. What happened? And I think also sees his mother there. It's this weird thing where Odysseus's journey takes so much longer than everyone else's getting home, 10 years.
Right.
But all this stuff has happened, and he sees a bunch of people in the underworld wondering, why are you here?
Yeah. Well, that will be an interesting tale for another time. This myth is an example of the failure to individuate that can result from a failure to make a proper sacrifice, a sacred sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Agamemnon is unable or unwilling to sacrifice his pride and to make humble restitution to the goddess he has offended. Nor is he willing to allow his desire for military glory to be thwarted by lack of wind. Instead, he kills his child rather than suffering the pain of sacrificing the arrogant and selfish side of the hero archetype and embracing a more compassionate aspect of the archetype. He values his own glorification over everything.
In a sense, I think you could argue the entire Trojan War is predicated on an unwillingness to sacrifice pride.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Menelaus is apparent at this point, right? It's obviously not his daughter, although it is his niece. And, you know, how many people fought and died because Menelaus refused to just let Helen go,
Right.
find a new wife. Obviously, there's these elements of, oh, but she's the most beautiful woman in the world. And they had this pact that they would all go to each other's defense.
Again, kind of this view of someone else as a possession
Exactly.
that you own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's over this slight. Something that they do in the Troy movie, which I think it has some great stuff, some stuff where it strays as well, of course, but they depict Agamemnon as having wanted to go to war with Troy anyway, right? That, yes, he's going to his brother's defense, but, you know.
But maybe there were other reasons as well.
Right. Troy was wealthy and well-known. There was glory to be had in conquering Troy regardless.
Yeah.
And this was a perfect excuse, which in some ways is more believable. Or maybe, I don't know if it's more or less depressing than just they're all...
It's more logical.
Right, yes.
Joseph Henderson makes the case that there are two kinds of heroes archetypally. There's power heroes who act only for glory and self-aggrandizement rather than any greater good. And I think as you were describing the run-up to the war in Troy, that's exactly what was going. Glory and self-aggrandizement, maybe wealth. Nobody had any greater good in mind.
Right.
A wisdom hero is one who engages in heroic acts in the service of some greater purpose. Through suffering or sacrifice, this hero has become consciously aware of his own nature and is therefore capable of compassion towards himself and others. Initiated heroes or wisdom heroes act out of love for others. They are humble rather than inflated. In Mercury Rising, Women, Evil, and the Trickster Gods, a great title, McNeely argues, arrogance is sometimes the attribute of the hero. Wisdom heroes typically model humility, while power heroes model arrogance. For the initiated or wisdom hero, there is still pain, but it has meaning and purpose. unlike the mad, destructive suffering described in the Iliad. The power heroes of the Trojan War are caught in their love of glory and pride. I think that the capacity to make the right sacrifices in parenting, to act out of that combination of sacrifice and love and sacrifice, to bring those together, is one of those factors that moves us out of the archetypal power hero and into the archetypal wisdom hero.
Yeah, I think if I were doing some separating out, we talked about Hercules, definitely falls into the power hero. We didn't cover Theseus' story, but at least the way he's depicted in Hercules' story, I feel like Theseus is more of that wisdom hero. And Odysseus...
And Prometheus is kind of the ultimate, who sacrifices sacrifices his liver every day.
Right.
So that humans can have fire.
Yeah. I feel like Odysseus, I'm a little more torn because while he is clever,
right,
clever is not the same thing as wise.
Or compassionate.
Right. And he gets in so much trouble out of arrogance.
Yes, absolutely. So I think Odysseus is maybe more human and less archetypal.
Or maybe going from power to wisdom, like
right.
over the course of his journey.
Exactly. Odysseus is a very human hero. Like he's a real mix of all kinds of interesting and admirable and sneaky and sly. I mean, he's less purely archetype and more like, oh yeah, I can see myself in that. Okay. So unlike a wisdom hero, the positive face of the hero, Agamemnon is purely haughty and narcissistic. And this personality pattern haunts all of his endeavors. When Agamemnon kills Iphigenia, he also kills an opportunity to step out of grandiosity, inflation, and self-centeredness. He really could have simply said, I'm sorry, army. I made a mistake. I brought the wrath of Artemis down upon us. We're going to have to wait for the wind to calm down. In making the choice instead to murder Iphigenia, he destroys his own capacity to mature as a human being and to cultivate empathy. And I think, kind of as we've been talking, we can see Agamemnon's choice as an archetypal choice we all have to make. We can choose to sacrifice our own narcissism, grandiosity, and inflation in service of something larger. So again, we can allow our brain to be ripped apart by the process of parenting. And if we do that, we lay the groundwork for individuation. Or we can sacrifice the vulnerable, either the child outside of ourselves, other vulnerable human beings, or vulnerable parts of our own psyche, with terrible consequences for our own growth and development.
Back in our Grimm fairy tales season, I think I was critical.
By Grimm, you mean the authors Grimm,
yes,
not? Although
indeed.
they were Grimm as well.
Grimm fairy tales, season 1 of this podcast. I was critical of a statement you had made regarding, I think, whether or not someone can truly achieve sort of full individuation without becoming a parent. And at the time, my daughter was not born yet.
Wow.
So I think I pushed back a little more. And now I think I understand what you meant, that there's a level of sacrifice inherent in being a good parent that those without children who haven't had to make that choice, they just don't have to engage with it. And that doesn't mean that they can't have full, fulfilling lives loaded with meaningful relationships.
And deep parenting sacrifice.
Right. As teachers or caregivers in other forms, as aunts, uncles, however. But it is a different kind of choice, and you don't have to go home with it for most of those. And I think there's also an inherent difference in brain chemistry after becoming a parent. I don't think it's just a metaphysical thing happening.
It's not just
in your
our
head.
ego. It's soma as well as psyche.
Right. And I'd have to look into that, but I would not be surprised to see distinct differences between parent brains and non-parent brains.
That would be a really interesting thing to research.
Could be wrong. Would love if someone could, point me towards any research about that. But if we choose to make that sacrifice of our own narcissism, I think we're just very different people. And I finished recently the second season of Severance.
Okay. Oh, I did not watch it.
Which is a show that gets into what makes someone a new person in terms of these people have sort of a switch in their brain that the company clicks where they don't remember anything once they've gotten to work. And then when they leave work, they don't remember anything that they did at work.
Right.
They go home.
Right. And I just found that premise so chilling that I was like, I'm not watching this at all.
So they're literally two different people. But I think we do that just over the course of time with big inflection points, like losing someone very, very close to us or going through some kind of tragedy.
Yeah.
Or becoming a parent. I think we don't get to do a side-by-side comparison, but I think those are moments where we basically make a new person.
Right. We're like, who was I before this, right? We are almost unrecognizable to ourselves on either side of the divide.
Right.
Yeah. And Agamemnon just doesn't do that. There's no one Agamemnon before and another Agamemnon after. Agamemnon is fully his crappy, lousy self from beginning to end. In what I find a kind of satisfying, in a sort of sick way, conclusion to the myth, an upending of the pattern results in the form of the enraged and grieving Clytemnestra, who takes advantage of Agamemnon's blind belief in his power and his inability to see the effects on his actions on others. So in this very Greek way, who you are is your fate. The once powerful hero Agamemnon is brought low in an act of revenge by the one whom he victimized.
Which is a conclusion that we have yet to see play out with parallel figures of our world today. But perhaps there's hope that we can legislate them away someday.
Vote them away, yes.
Yeah. Well, next time we'll be getting into Medea. Medea, would you say darker?
No.
What, about the same?
No. I think that we find mothers killing their children so alien that we experience it as the darkest thing possible. Whereas, unfortunately, I think we find fathers behaving negatively, cruelly, ragefully towards their children awful, but sort of more ordinary. Medea feels like a freak.
Right.
Agamemnon is just a war leader.
Yeah.
So and that's why I think it's important to talk about Medea next.
Of course. Well, that's it for today. Our intro-outro music is a sample of Seculo's Epitaph with the Lyre of Apollo by Lena Palera under an attribution non-commercial share-alike 3.0 international license. You can find the full version at freemusicarchive.org, link in the show notes. And if you like what you've been hearing, please leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your podcast feed of choice, as it really helps other people find the show. This show will always be free and available to all, but if you would like to monetarily support the show, you can do so at ko-fi.com/JungianEverAfter. Also, Dr. Adina Davidson is a certified Jungian analyst. You can find out more about her practice at adinadavidson.com or her Psychology Today profile. We'll be with you again next time, but until then, we hope your days are filled with exploring the worlds of imagination and storytelling.